let's flip it to the other semifinal. This is, again, talk about blue bloods, the bluest of blue bloods, right? Texas and Ohio State. Friday night, as of now, scheduled for 7:30 Eastern at the Cotton Bowl. Ohio State favored by 6 points. Feels about right. Just how absolutely dominant they have been through 2 games in the CFP. You mentioned this earlier. Ryan Day has coached himself off the hot seat. Like, it's been incredible what we've seen from the Buckeyes since their loss to Michigan. You've got a Texas team that has had their ups and downs. They were fortunate to be in this position. They were 4th and 13 away from losing to Arizona State in the quarterfinal round. That was a game that they struggled in a lot of different areas, right? ASU was able to move the ball really well against them. We talked a lot about Cam Scatterbo and everything he was able to individually accomplish to will that team back into that game. Yeah. But, we've just had questions throughout the year about Texas's run game, Quinn Ewers' ceiling, just kind of who Texas can be. So to me, this feels about right that Ohio State is almost a touchdown favorite because I was at the Rose Bowl, right? Like, I saw that high-powered offense up close and personal. And even if they don't have like the first quarter and a half that they did against the Rose Bowl, or the first quarter against Tennessee, even if they're like 50% of that, that's still probably the best team left in the playoff.
Yeah, and I mean, do you need to have the first quarter, the first half, when Texas has been a team that in the second half has not necessarily performed, right? Like, you look at the SEC championship, they go into halftime with a lead in that one. Gunnar Stockton brings Georgia back. There were moments in the second half against Clemson where that thing felt like it could get really interesting. And then, of course, Arizona State in the second half of that game was the team. They dominated. It felt like Texas kind of went away. And so I do think this is like you have to weather the storm of the beginning part of the game if you're Texas. You can't let Ohio State do what they did to Tennessee and Oregon. But you also have to make sure that in the second half of the game, you're up for it. And there's a legitimate question for me with Texas. And we didn't talk about it as much with Penn State because I don't know if it's as big of a factor with them. But with Texas, they played the SEC championship game. They had to, have their guys were in there for a long time against Clemson. And then Arizona State, you could see their defense getting worn down toward the end of the game. They got the big plays when they needed to. So it's not to say they disappeared, but they were wearing down. Those guys have played, I think, they played like close to 100 snaps against Arizona State. They've played significantly more snaps than the Ohio State guys have. And I think that's going to matter, especially when you're talking about this offense that's making guys run now with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. You're tracing Chavion Henderson down the sideline. Like, I think the legs of Texas is a factor in this one. How much do they have left in their legs?
It's a really good point. And certainly with the way that Ohio State has played, they have had the luxury of taking guys out whenever they wanted to, when they build up big leads like that. And Jeremiah Smith, I think, is worth a specific spotlight here because we said it all season. We were tracking all the different Ohio State freshman records and what they were trying to accomplish. But what he has done, if people did not watch them week to week, if you only watched him in the playoff, you understand how special he is. And I was watching back on National Signing Day, that clip where Ryan Day is like, he's either asked, like, did you get the facts or, the document from Jeremiah Smith or whatever. And he just like kind of like fake collapses. Like he was so nervous and so relieved when it came in. And everyone was kind of like, dude, it's like a teenager. What are you doing? Why are you so dramatic? And then you watch him. And like, I remember we were there in the spring for the spring game and like, they did not hold back. Like, they hyped him up as high as anybody else. Like, there was no like, hey, let's wait and see. He's going to be young. They knew how special he was going to be. And so it's been really cool to get to watch like the rest of the world see it and to see like a lot of people missed his first touchdown at the Rose Bowl because they're still watching the end of the Peach Bowl. Like, he was just like, it was instant impact. These are big, big plays. His catch radius is crazy. Like, they don't even have to be perfect throws, but like, what a luxury for Will Howard. Man, it's just a special dude. And so I think you're putting him in a different category now. And then you still have Emeka Egbuka, who is phenomenal, the veteran. Right. He's going to have a great long career in the NFL too. But it's like, I don't know what you do if you're Texas. And like you said, you're a little tired coming into this game. And now you got these two guys where you can't let either of them get much space because they're going to beat you. They're going to torch you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas is the best built defense that Ohio State would have seen to stop it outside of the Michigan game plan. But Ohio State has evolved offensively to try to get away from that, especially with the run game and some of the ways that they have created different runs, but they're also throwing it to run the football. And so teams are like, oh, people are like, why can't people do what Michigan did? It's like, well, Ohio State's forcing you to play them a little bit differently now, where
Right.
if you're going to keep your safeties out of the fit, which Michigan did a ton. Ohio State's not dumb enough right now to try to run it into the middle of the defense. And by the way, most teams don't have the two inside guys that Michigan had. And so I do think these matchups are becoming a little bit easier for them to figure out. All of that said, I thought that Tennessee had the best pair of corners to try to go up against Ohio State. Ohio State torched them. They torched the living hell out of them. I think that Texas has the best overall secondary. And so now I am curious if this is a team that can cover them a little bit tighter than we've seen other defenses cover them. And then the next question becomes, can this Texas front handle Ohio State and their run game and create pressure without adding extra guys from the secondary? I think Texas has a phenomenal defensive front. But Will Howard has not been pressured by anybody, and that includes Oregon, who maybe had the most underrated D-line. You know how I feel about Derek Harmon. I think he's the second best defensive tackle that'll be in the draft. They had Jordan Burch. They had Mateo Uyunglele. Neither one of those guys had an impact on the game. Can Ohio State's offensive line continue to hold up and force people to have to bring extra defenders if they want to pressure Will Howard, who has played his best football of his career at this point, by the way? So it's real intriguing from that standpoint. And we haven't even talked about the Ohio State defense versus Texas's offense, which
Right.
Ohio State really good defensively, but I also think Sark knows how to dial it up. And when he gets to call the plays that he wants to play, that offense is really difficult to stop. This is one of the most intriguing matchups we could have gotten.
Completely agree, right? Because again, so you've got the Ohio State receiver room versus the Texas secondary. You've got the matchup of Sark versus a defense in Jim Knowles that has been really, really dominant most of the season. But certainly, they've given up points. They've given up, in the playoff, but never, in actual, like, these games were not close. They were not dicey. And, they had that long stretch of like not giving up a passing touchdown. We just saw a lot of dominant performances, including at the end of the game against Penn State too. One other key factor on that side is right tackle Cameron Williams for Texas. He has been banged up. He was one of the ones we were using this as an example in the first round of the bye versus a first round game. He gets banged up in that, and that becomes a factor because they really struggled to run the ball against Arizona State. And so he practiced, at least during the media period of time, the brief practice on Sunday. So there definitely seems to be some optimism about him coming back, but that's a factor as well, because like we have seen Texas play in some of these games where they could not run the ball at all.
Yeah.
And that impacts, again, how you defend them, what you can call, and how you work here. I know you think we'll see Arch Manning in this game, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to get the run game started. This is not like a Quinn Ewers shouldn't play or he's played bad enough to lose his job.
In packages or specific moments.
Yes, this is I think it's matchup dependent, but I also think that for Texas, they have to find ways to run the football. Both times against Georgia, they did not run it well. They lost that game. And then against Arizona State, that game became really dicey, one that was very losable for them, and they didn't run it at all. And I look at Ohio State, and where their defenses struggled the most all year long is Dylan Gabriel in the first matchup was able to use his legs, and it became a factor in the game. Then they go on and they play Nebraska. And Dylan Raiola is able to use his legs as a guy who's not a runner, and it becomes a factor in that game. Against Northwestern, which is crazy. You take the sack yardage out of there. Northwestern's quarterback, Jack Lausch, had a pretty good day using his legs, and Northwestern was able to move the ball a little bit on this Ohio State defense. Probably the best passing day anybody had post-Oregon against Ohio State. And then finally, Nico with Tennessee, the only offense that they had was Nico running the football. So if I'm looking at this as an opposing offensive coach, I have to say, how can we incorporate some quarterback run? And Quinn Ewers has been banged up. He's not very mobile. And I think they got to bring Arch in at times to try to run the football from the quarterback position and hopefully open up the rest of the running game.
Yeah, that one's going to be a really fascinating game. And certainly, again, Ohio State coming out of the Rose Bowl performance, odds-on favorite to win it all. I think like just all of us as football watchers, we're like, all right, like Ohio State is the team to beat here moving forward. I think they win. And I think that they cover the 6 points because this is just they're steamrolling people. It gets out of hand. And again, I think Texas has dudes, but so did Tennessee, so did
Yeah.
Oregon, and
Yeah.
it didn't ultimately matter. So I think, again, I don't know if they'll be 100% firing on all cylinders, as Dan Lanning put it, where like there was just nothing you could do to stop them. But I think that they will be close to that. They will be much more of that version than the version of Ohio State that we saw lose to Michigan. And I think Ohio State's going to play for a national championship. So I picked the Buckeyes here.
Yeah, I think for Texas, like if they were going to win this game, Sark would have to be as aggressive in his play calling. Like the first 10 plays essentially that we saw against Arizona State, he would have to have that for their offense just dialed up, can go down the field, 3 plays, 75 yards, score, and do that multiple times. And then defensively, like it's take the football away. It's make Will Howard do dumb things. And I'm not sure they can do it because nobody's been able to do it this postseason. I've got Ohio State winning this game. And frankly, I think the only reason that it's Ohio State favored by 6 right now is because they got to go 200 miles away from Austin to play the game. It's going to be a favorable crowd for Texas. I think if this was played anywhere else, that number would be bigger, but I got Ohio State winning and covering.
Yeah, it is an interesting, a little bit of I mean, again, they're the higher seed, right? They were an at-large team, but they are closer to home. The weather could be a factor here as well, in terms of kind of the crowd and maybe even when this game gets played, if it gets adjusted at any point. So lots to track there. These should be 2 great semifinal games. This is part of it, right? Like there might be blowouts in earlier rounds, but you're getting teams that are prepared, that have won, that are tough, that are deep, that are physical. The deeper you get into the playoffs. So hopefully we get 2 great semifinal games.